Canceled rent and mortgage payments. In this video, I'm going to go and unpack a new stimulus bill that would essentially cancel all rent and mortgage payments for 1 year. Hey, what's up you guys? This is Sam Kwok here, one of the Kwok brothers, and in this video, I'm gonna go and unpack and explain a new stimulus bill that would essentially cancel all rent and mortgage payment. Now, before we do, be sure to subscribe to our channel if you want to get more updates on stimulus programs as well as investing in real estate. So a couple of days ago, this proposal bill was introduced to the House of Representatives, and it's called Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. Now, keep in mind, guys, that this is just a proposal. It's not a law just yet. In order for a bill to become a law, it must first get passed through the House of Representatives and then to the Senate and ultimately signed by the president. Now, the president can veto this bill, which it goes back to the U.S. Senate, and if the U.S. Senate really wants to get it passed, it needs at least 2/3 of the senators to pass the bill for it to become a full-fledged law. And I'll give you my commentary from a landlord's perspective, and I know a lot of you guys listening right now are landlords yourself, so I'll go ahead and give you guys some special perspective from a landlord's point of view. So I got the bill in front of me, and I'll share the screen with you guys so that you can see exactly what I'm reading, and you'll see it yourself as well. Right out of the gate, there's a short title called Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. And moving on to Section 2, suspension of obligations to make residential and mortgage rent payment. Already, Section 2A talks about rent payments. Now, within 2A1, suspension, this talks about how rent payments are now suspended if this bill were to become a law. So I'm going to read this off to you guys verbatim. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the obligation of each tenant household of a covered rental dwelling unit to pay rent for occupancy in such dwelling unit shall be suspended with respect to such occupancy during the COVID-19 suspension period. So basically what this is saying is that during the suspension period, the tenant or the tenant household is not required to make any rent payment while this is in full effect. Consequently, the landlord will not be able to collect any rent from the rental property. Also, the bill puts restrictions on what the landlord cannot do. So the first thing that the landlord cannot do while the suspension period is in full effect, the landlord may not charge any fine or fees for non-payment of the rent. Additionally, such non-payment of rent shall not be ground for any termination of a tenancy or eviction. So if your tenant under this bill does not pay their rent, you as a landlord may not initiate an eviction process nor terminate the lease. Furthermore, any rent that is not being collected cannot be treated as debt. So as a landlord, we cannot go back to any missed rent payments and treat that as if the balance is accruing, and we can't go back to collect that amount from our tenants. Plus, landlords may not take any action that would create adverse or negative impact on the tenant's credit score as well as credit report. So to sum it up, under this bill, the tenant doesn't have to pay any rent and there are no consequences of doing so. And the landlord cannot charge any late fees or start an eviction process or to take any action to create a negative impact on the tenant's credit report. Already, this bill is a huge loss for the landlords. And not to mention that this bill only applies to residential leases. What about commercial leases, office rent, storage rent? Are they off the hook as well? So the bill only covers residential leases, not commercial leases whatsoever. Now, onto the mortgage side of things, a similar suspension is also taking effect if this bill is to become a law. And just like the restrictions on landlords, there are also restrictions on banks and lending institutions as to what they cannot do during the suspension period under the bill. Under this bill, banks and lending institutions may not treat any unpaid payments as debt that's accruing over time. Also, banks and lending institutions may not initiate any foreclosure actions on non-payment of mortgage as well. And just like the restrictions on landlords, there may not be any fees or penalties for non-payment of the mortgage, as well as banks and lending institutions may not take any adverse actions to create a negative impact on the consumer's credit report and credit score. And all that being said, can the government really enforce this? Well, according to this bill, they can. Under Section 3, civil action, pretty much anyone that is found to be violating this law is subject to fines and penalties. Under damages and penalties, any lessor or mortgagee found to have taken adverse action against the lessee or mortgagor, borrower in this case, for exercising rights under Section 2 shall be liable. A $5,000 fine in case of violation is the first violation by the landlord or the lending institution. So if you are a landlord or a bank or a lending institution found to be violating this bill, right? You get a fine of $5,000. Now, in a second violation, it's a $10,000 fine, and get this, a third violation may result in $50,000 fine or a forfeiture of the property. So basically, if this bill were to become a law and you violate it 3 times, the government can come and seize your property and your asset and also could charge you a fine of up to $50,000. But you know what the worst violation is? Not clicking on the like button on this video for the YouTube algorithm. So in case you haven't done that already, go and smash the like button, turn that like button to blue. So this bill will now give government the power to enforce these laws by charging you fines and potentially taking your property by violating any of the provisions of this law. It's almost like my cousin Kim Jong-un. I mean, the guy in North Korea and Kim Jong-un has wrote this law so that he can go and take all the properties for himself. Again, guys, go and tell me what you guys think down below. Leave your comments. I don't know how you feel about it. Of course, I don't feel that great about this because I'm a landlord myself, and I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to protect the tenants and all, but there has to be an equal balance, and balance doesn't check to all things. So go and leave your comments down below. If you haven't already, go and leave your thoughts, anger, frustration, whatever the case might be, go and leave your thoughts down below. Now, the bill is nice enough to go and leave what's called a Landlord Relief Fund stipulation inside the bill. So under Section 4, Landlord Relief Fund, this essentially gives the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development the right to go and create something called the Landlord Relief Fund, in which the Relief Fund will now reimburse any of the landlords pretty much not being able to collect the rent. So let me get this straight. The government tells you that you can't collect the rent, but the government will give you money for not collecting rent? What? Once you accept the relief fund, within 5 years of accepting the fund, you must follow these set of rules. The first set of rules is a mandatory rent freeze. So for 5 years after you accept the relief fund, you may not increase the rent for 5 years. So let me read this verbatim. The monthly rent for dwelling unit may not be increased from the amount of such rent charge as of the date of the enactment of this act. So if you are charging your tenant, let's say $1,200 a month, and today you receive this relief fund from the government, now they're saying, sorry, you can't change the rent for 5 years. Now, the problem I have with this is that what if the cost of living goes up? Or what if the underlying expenses to run the property goes up, such as property taxes or insurance, or the general expenses go up, but we can't increase it within the 5 years if you accept a relief fund. And again, already the government says you can't collect rent and they're gonna give you a relief fund, but now they're telling you, hey, sorry, you can't go and increase the rent. Sorry about that. It's because of the coronavirus. Blame the coronavirus. The second set of rules you have to follow is a just cause eviction clause. Now, this clause says that a tenant of the dwelling unit may be evicted only for just cause and only pursuant to advance written notice to the tenant of such just cause. Now, in most cases, evictions happen because of just cause, and that is non-payment of rent, or the tenant violates a lease agreement. But what if the tenant is on a month-to-month lease agreement and the landlord wants to evict them? In another case, what if the landlord wants to terminate the lease so that they can sell the property? Can they not terminate the agreement under the just cause eviction clause? So again, more control, more rules, more regulations, more things you have to follow with this relief fund in exchange for the relief fund. So the next set of rules that you have to follow is source of income discrimination clause. Now, what this basically means is that you cannot discriminate against any new tenants that apply that are under the Section 8 program or any of the publicly assisted programs. So if you have a tenant or a new tenant that comes to you and says, hey, I have a Section 8 voucher, I would like to rent, you have to treat them just like the other tenants that may not have a Section 8 program or a voucher. In connection to that rule, the next rule says that if you have any vacancies coming up, you as a landlord must coordinate with the public or other housing authority to make the vacant unit available for households assisted by programs that I just described, Section 8 or any other publicly assisted programs. So now you have your local government as your silent partner, and you have to consult with that partner to basically rent out your property. Next set of rule is called emissions restriction. Now this says the lessor may not restrict tenancy of dwelling unit based on sexual identity or orientation, gender identity or expression, conviction or arrest record, credit history, or immigration status. Now, I don't have any beef about someone's sexual orientation or how they want to express themselves, but I do have beef about the credit history and arrest record. So this basically says that you cannot screen your tenants based on credit history and their criminal record. I mean, how else will you vet the tenants? Like, based on their looks? I mean, that's even worse, right? I mean, how else will you vet the tenant if we can't vet based on their credit history and their arrest record? I mean, sure, we can vet them based on income, but what if they're making a ton of money but they never pay their bills? That's a major problem. So already, I don't know if I could go with this. I mean, I'm totally cool with the sexual identity and the orientation part. I have no problem with that. I mean, but I have a major problem with not being able to vet a tenant based on their credit history or the arrest records. And that's not all. There's a provision that basically says that if the 5-year period is over and you have the same tenant, as a landlord, you cannot go back and try to charge them on whatever rent that you were not able to increase over the last 5 years. Also, you may not retaliate against your tenant based on all the rules that I just described. And of course, it says landlords may not report the tenant of a dwelling unit to a debt collector or provide any adverse information regarding the tenant to any credit reporting agencies. Okay, to sum everything up, if you, as a landlord, take this relief fund, you may not increase any rent for 5 years. You must have just cause for evictions. You may not discriminate against source of income. Now you have to work with the public or other housing authority to make new vacancies available. You may not screen your applicants based on their credit history or their criminal record. You may not go back and collect any of the rents that you missed out on. You may not retaliate against the tenants. And you may not report any negative information about the tenant to the credit reporting agency. That's a lot. I need to take a breath from that. And of course, there's a clause in this bill that basically says that if you violate any of the rules that we just talked about, they have the right to come and get the money back from you if you're found to be violating any of the rules. So basically, this is the government saying that, hey, we're gonna give you this relief fund, but you need to be a landlord that we want you to be. If you don't, we're gonna take that money back. So all in all, I have a bunch of questions about this bill, such as who's gonna pay for it, how it's gonna be enforced, is this even constitutional, does this violate private ownership of assets, and honestly, bills like this won't really have a big chance of getting passed anyways. The chance of this bill ever getting passed through the House of Representatives is like 1 out of a million.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
So to give you my landlord perspective on this bill, I believe that this bill will create major chaos on all private ownership of property. This is going to destroy the balance of the free market, and a bill that was created to protect the tenants may actually backfire on the tenants. Because what are the incentives of investors and wealthy individuals investing into neighborhoods as well as providing capital for some of these properties, and who's going to maintain these buildings? The government? And don't get me wrong, guys, I'm all about providing high quality housing to my tenants as well as being fair and being generous. But when it comes to canceling rent payments for an entire year, I don't think this is the balanced approach to do so. So it's kind of like saying that all restaurants are now required to provide free food and the government's gonna basically foot the bill. And all that being said, again, I don't think this bill is gonna get ever passed. I think this is just a proposal and it's gonna die out as soon as the economy reopens back up. So again, let me know what you guys think about this bill. Go and leave your comments down below and go and smash the like button to basically says no thank you to this bill.